Well, hello. I am here today with Dr. Kamilah Legette. Thank you so much for joining us to have this conversation about hope.
Thank you for
Um,
having me.
yeah, if you wouldn't mind just kind of introducing yourself and your work, I'm sure everybody would love to hear a bit about it.
Yes, thank you for having me. I am an assistant professor in the psychology department at the University of Denver, and I'm also the director of the Reducing Inequities in Student Education Research Lab. We call it RISE for short. In my work at the lab, I examine ways youth school experiences can shape their outcomes like social emotional development, racial identity, school belonging, and achievement. I also examine factors that can contribute to students having positive and negative schooling experiences. Right now, one area that RISE is examining is classroom discipline. We know that racial disparities exist at the school level in terms of thinking about suspensions between Black and white youth. Starting in preschool and through high school, Black youth suspensions range from 2 to 6 times higher than their white peers. And these are not due to infractions like fighting or vandalism or something severe, but more subjective perceptions like defiance, disrespect, and disobedience. In my work, I try to examine what's happening at the classroom level and see if student-teacher interactions in the classroom may relate to teachers' discipline practices. So thinking about exclusionary discipline at the classroom level, where the teachers are using practices like sitting a child outside of the classroom, sending them alone, practices that exclude them from their peers in their learning environment, and trying to understand if race may consciously or unconsciously play a role in the practices that teachers implement and how that can shape children's social emotional development and relationships with teachers. Another factor RISE is examining is also factors that can contribute to those classroom discipline practices. And one area we're thinking about is teachers' emotional responses towards behaviors. So how do teachers feel when a student misbehaves? And is that feeling changing based on the race of the student? And what we're finding is that for the same misbehavior, sometimes teachers report feeling more anger for that behavior compared to frustration when the student is Black compared to white. So really trying to think about factors that contribute to students' positive or negative schooling experiences, but then also how those experiences can relate to their identity and social emotional development. And those are a couple of things that we're working on in RISE Lab right now.
I mean, it's crazy that those are just a couple of things that you're working on, and it's all of the building blocks of hope, right? So I
Right.
know
Yeah.
that we're here to kind of talk about fostering positive relationships between students and teachers and how that can really affect a trajectory of a student's kind of education career, so to speak. But you also just mentioned all of the other building blocks, promoting safe, stable environments for kids to learn in, promoting social emotional growth, engaging kids. So as I mentioned, we'll kind of focus in on that student teacher relationship and how important that is. But I just want to say, I'm kind of in shock about how aligned and hopeful your work
Yes.
is. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that this work it can feel so big, right? In a lot of ways. And systemic racism is overwhelming and systemic, and it can be hard to know even where to start.
Right.
Can you provide some examples of, practically how a school might begin to build these healthier relationships?
Yeah, so it is, you're right, it's really big. And I think the first thing is we're talking about when we think about structural racism is just having teachers acknowledge that they're not immune to holding these racial biases and it's not neutral in their classroom. So once we figure out what those biases are and how they are working in the classroom, then we can work to reduce them. So for example, like we talked about with the work on teachers' emotions, one thing we can try to think about is maybe emotion regulation for teachers and how that may play a role in their discipline practices. So if schools and administrators and the policymakers want to think about having teachers take workshops on racial bias and ways that those biases may come out in their emotional responses to students. I think that's one way that we can start to try to build positive relationships with teachers for Black students.
Absolutely. Yes. I feel like everybody who's working in the world could benefit from that, but especially for those who are working with our youth.
Exactly.
Have you in the RISE Lab been able to kind of measure the impact of your work as it relates to strengthening that student teacher relationship and then potentially even ongoing student achievement or success?
So right now we have not been able to measure that with student outcomes, but I'm really excited because we're partnering with the school district in the fall, and that is something that we're going to be doing. And so we're trying to see ways teachers' emotional responses in the classroom might relate to their student-teacher relationship, might relate to either students' own emotions in the classroom, as well as thinking about discipline practices and student social-emotional development. So I'm excited to get there, hopefully in the next year. Right now, we've just been focusing more on looking at teachers' practices in terms of using vignettes. And so having teachers read these scenarios about proposed behaviors and seeing how they would respond. And so I'm really excited to be able to get into the classroom, partner with the school district, and work on these issues with students and teachers.
And so it sounds like right now, all of this work is kind of happening in the lab, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
specifically at your RISE lab. Are there ways that people can learn more about the work or get engaged?
Yes, absolutely. I would love to have people involved. I'm always looking to collaborate with schools and just think about ways to reduce inequities in student education and those pathways. They can reach me via email, first, last name @du.edu. I also have a website, riselabresearch.org, and has all the research projects on there, as well as ways to contact and be involved in the RISE Lab.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yes.
I'm so excited to share your work. And it's always fun and inspiring when we hear about such hopeful practice that is kind of outside from the Hope National Resource Center, that people are just, you're out there doing this kind of independent of Hope, but that aligns so well with positive childhood experiences and our 4 building blocks. And so thank you for being part of our unofficial network and for doing the work and taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate being able to share our work and look forward to many more conversations.
Awesome.